Hello. So we ended our previous class on Weber. In fact, we spent 2 lectures looking at the Protestant ethic and the spirit of capitalism. If you remember, prior to that, I had spoken about Weber's methodology and his notion of the ideal type. He carries on this understanding, this methodology of looking at ideal types or the pure type. He sometimes refers to it as the pure type when he starts looking at what is power, authority and domination. Usually we look at power, authority and domination as we kind of mix these terms and sometimes use one for the other. But Weber gives us very clear definitions and different types or ways in which authority can be manifested. This work actually comes from a series of his essays that he wrote between 1905 and 1920, and if you remember, he passed away in 1920 at the age of late 50s of pneumonia, and his wife Mary Ann Weber ended up compiling all of that, and in the first installment that she published were the first 3 essays which Weber had also typesetted, and then eventually she put together his other essays, and this is quite a magnum opus. The whole of Economy and Society is some 300-400 pages and very, very detailed kind of insights on several aspects of law, society, methodology, power, domination, types of authority, the state and so on. So we are going to be talking about today about power, authority and domination. Let's jump right into it. So let's see how Weber defines power, and Weber defines power as the probability that one actor within a social relationship will be in a position to carry out his will despite resistance. So this is the understanding of power, is that this person has the possibility of carrying out his will even if there is resistance or opposition. That does not necessarily mean that the person is legitimated or authorized to carry out his will. Power is equal to capacity, but it does not include legitimacy. Let's go on further to understand how he relates power to domination. For domination, Weber writes, the probability that certain specific commands or all the commands will be obeyed by a given group of persons. Domination may be based on the most diverse motives of compliance, all the way from simple habituation to most purely rational calculation of advantage. Hence, every genuine form of domination implies a minimum of voluntary compliance. That is, an interest based on ulterior motives or genuine acceptance, doesn't matter, could be any of them, but an interest in obedience. So one could say that domination, if you want to kind of put it in an equation form, is equal to power that has legitimacy. So power combined with legitimacy brings domination. Then we go on to authority, and here Weber differs quite a bit from Marx. If you remember from our Marx lectures, according to Marx, history moves forward because of changing modes of production, right? It's the evolution of the various modes of production that propels history forward. Weber has a slightly different view. We already spoke about the fact that while Marx is very much a materialist, Weber also gives importance to the role of ideas. So according to Weber, history is driven by the evolution of the means of administration and domination. So as different forms of authority and domination take form in the world history, so history moves forward based on this struggle for power. So from patriarchal we move to patrimonial, to feudal, which he also calls the estate type of domination, and then eventually the state that we are in now, which he calls legal rational authority. So different phases of how authority works shows the different stages of history. Now, Weber says that it's useful to classify the types of authority according to the claims to legitimacy typically made by each. And he gives us three forms of authority. One is legal rational authority, traditional authority, and charismatic authority. And interestingly, so each one is a different way in which authority is legitimated, right? Because authority, if you remember, or domination, he uses these two terms somewhat interchangeably, implies that there is interest in obedience, right? So, how does that happen? Is that while it can be justified by rationality, it can be justified by divinely ordained, any of that, but this is basically the way it is legitimated actually is the creation of a myth, right? And each one of these forms of authority seeks to arouse and foster a belief in that myth of their legitimate use of authority. And we will see how that happens in various forms. So let's begin with traditional authority. And I've put down here some of the quotes from Weber's text, Economy and Society. And Weber writes, traditional authority is an everyday belief in the sanctity of long established traditions and the legitimacy of those whose authority derives from these traditions. To put it simply, you can even, one of the simplest and the easiest examples to understand traditional authority is that of a family. In a family, we are bound together by traditions. Family is a traditional unit, and in a family, there is usually a understood or implied hierarchy that pretty much everybody, even when they resist, respect, right? So, a family is a very good example of traditional authority. Then he says, in traditional authority, the master or the leader or the one who is obeyed as a virtue of the dignity afforded to them by tradition. It could be the elderly, it could be somebody who's been divinely ordained, like the Pope, or the belief that they have been divinely ordained, or the monarch in times when we believed they get their power from a supreme power. And so these ways in which authority is justified using some sort of a tradition or a ritual is traditional authority. The actual exercise of rule is governed by what the ruler and his administration can usually allow themselves in their dealing with traditionally differential subjects without provoking them to resistance. This is the complicated way of Weber's basically trying to tell us that you're not governed by a set of rules. In the traditional authority, it is the traditional master or leader who has in some ways immense power in dictating or deciding that this is the way, this is what you need to obey, this is what you need to do. So it could change the next day, right? It's not a pre-decided set of rules that everybody is governed by. So it's very much dependent on that individual or whoever he vests his authority in. So I already gave the example of a family, and the family you can extend it into an extended family, a kin-based network, a clan, a tribe eventually. But as long as it is based on one person's rule or one person being obeyed, we call it patriarchalism in the traditional authority. When that patriarch gives some of his powers or assigns some of his powers to his staff, has an administrative staff to do the works of collecting taxes, ensuring that people are obeying his orders, then we refer to that as patrimonialism. Now, in patrimonialism, how is the staff selected? And there can be various ways. It could be somebody who's related. I assign my brother to do the job of a minister, and I assign my uncle to be the treasurer. So it could be that, or it could be other bonds of loyalty or reverence. And in Weber's words, administrative staff are usually recruited owing to bonds of reverence, such as kinsmen or former slaves who the authority has freed and therefore owe immense loyalty to the traditional authority. At the personal discretion of the master. So that is important. It is not through an examination or a meritorial system or any kind of rule-based system. It is the personal discretion of the traditional authority to hire staff or to get staff and to vest in that administrative staff the power to do the will of the traditional authority. Now, this kind of authoritative system, which is bound by tradition, where there are so many limitations because of being vested in one person and because of the lack of qualified administrative staff and also because of the lack of a predictable rule of law, Weber argues that traditional authority limits rational economic organization. So traditional authority does not have the elective affinity to give rise to the capitalist mode of production that we know today. So while he's describing all of these different forms of authority, he's also linking them to economy. What kinds of systems will these authorities enable or facilitate or not facilitate, right? So he's paying attention to a lot of economy and societal linkages. So now we come to charismatic authority, which is quite a fascinating form of authority, because charismatic authority is to do with the attribution of exceptional powers or the recognition that somebody has exceptional powers and everyone else is in awe of. And let's read what Weber has to write about this. He writes, charisma is the personal quality that makes an individual seem extraordinary, a quality by virtue of which supernatural, superhuman, or at least exceptional powers or properties are attributed to the individual. Powers or properties that are not found in everyone and that are thought to be the gift of God or exemplary, rendering that individual to be a leader. This extraordinary property was originally applied to prophets, to individuals thought to have special therapeutic powers, or to possess legal wisdom, to those who led bands of hunters, or to military heroes. As such, magical powers were attributed to these individuals. How the relevant quality would be objectively and properly evaluated in terms of some kind of ethical, aesthetic, or other standpoint is conceptually a matter of indifference for the particular definition. What matters is how this quality is actually judged by those who are ruled charismatically, how the followers see things. So he really wants to remind us that charisma, which he says was originally a property that was attributed to somebody who, you can say that people who were founders of religions. So, Prophet Muhammad, Jesus Christ, these were considered charismatic figures. But the charisma, while it is attributed to themselves, it actually lies in the recognition by their followers, right? So this part is very important. Charismatic authority, he writes, lies in the recognition of those subject to this authority. And the charismatic figure also must justify that charisma, right? It could be they need to promise miracles, they need to promise or they need to show us a vision of something that we had thought was impossible. They need to show us hope. I mean, I don't know if any of you remember or were old enough to watch President Obama in the United States, his campaign, but his line of yes we can bring in the change, or Martin Luther King's I have a dream. I mean, these are the kind of promises that charismatic leaders promise, and then they have to show a proof of success. I've also put up a picture of Mahatma Gandhi, a charismatic leader who could take the nation along in his fight for what many might have believed was impossible, a freedom from colonial rule. Now, there isn't really a rationality to charisma. Charisma is a feeling that is evoked. Charisma is a myth that is created. Charisma is, the awe that is generated in the recognition. So he says it is specifically irrational in the sense that it is foreign to all rules. It doesn't follow any rules, right? Traditional authority still could be how does, let's say, succession happen in traditional authority is via either hereditary, or in the case of the Dalai Lama, who's also a charismatic leader but is also a traditional leader, it could be through certain rituals. But here there doesn't have to be any rule, and you can't say that I am a charismatic leader so my offspring would also be a charismatic leader. That doesn't usually follow in charismatic rule. And that charismatic authority is a revolutionary force. When things are all static, or when things take a long time to change, then a charismatic leader can come about and bring about quick change or a quick revolution. This has happened in the context of race. This has happened in the context of gender, in decolonization, so we have seen charismatic leaders bring about these change. He also, Weber, grapples with what happens because once a leader becomes a leader, I mean, when, let's say, a charismatic leader is head of the government, in the case of Obama one can say that, then they are also subject to judgment, right, all the time. And then there is a routinization of that charisma that has to happen. The systems and procedures have to somehow come up, but they don't quite easily fit in with the idea. And here also it's not predictable, right? So, and then if it is not predictable, it is not that, it doesn't have that kind of elective affinity to a capitalist mode of production, which requires routine, which requires order, which requires predictability. So, which is the form of authority that lends itself very well to the rise of capitalism? Weber calls it legal rational authority, and he says the purest form of legal rational authority is bureaucracy. Legal rational authority is the rule of law. It is not the rule of an individual. It is not a charismatic leader or a traditional leader who is the authority or the master, but it is the rule of law, a consistent system of abstract and intentionally established rules through which our lives are governed. Now, these laws, usually we might think that legal rational authority is similar to democracy. That's a misconception, because there can be a rule of law under a very, very authoritative dictatorial system also, as long as the law is clearly spelled out. I can dictate a law. It doesn't have to be made through a constitutional process. So, in fact, a constitutional monarchy or a dictatorship are as well legal rational authority systems as is a democracy. But it is important that the laws are established. Whether they are established by agreement or by imposition, it does not matter. The person of authority, the one who issues the order, is themselves subject to the rule of law in legal rational authority. And members of the society owe their obedience not to the person or not to the leader or the master, but to this impersonal order, the rule of law, the constitution, whatever the legal framework or the agreed upon framework of the time and space. What is important is that this legal rational authority offers a continuous, predictable, rule-bound conduct, which is why it is actually most suited to the rise of capitalism. There are clear spheres of competence, there is a clear hierarchy, there is a clear right of appeal. Think about, for example, for traditional authority, I gave you the example of a family. For legal rational authority, you can take the example of your university. You want to apply for leave, you need to first get a signature of your supervisor, then you need to go to the head of the department. The application would then go to the dean of academics, who would maybe then send it to the dean of students for a hostel leave. There is a clearly established procedure, right? You know I need to follow these steps. Supposing there is a disciplinary action, there is a appellate authority that you can appeal to in order to give your justification or appeal against the decision of the disciplinary committee. For each rule, there is an understanding that these are the steps, this is the hierarchy, these are the ways that I have to move forward. The staff in legal rational authority, or the administrative staff that is implementing this legal rational authority, has to be separated from the ownership of the means of production or administration. It cannot be that I am the one making the law and I am the one implementing it, right? The university is bound by the rules of its board of governors or its senate. It is not that because I am a dean I will do as I wish, right? It is I am also bound by, I don't own the book of rules. I don't own the idea that I will institute these rules. So that separation in legal rational authority is very, very critical. All right, now this is a long slide, and my joke here is that usually we think of bureaucracy as something that is inefficient and something that doesn't really work, but let's see what Weber has to say for it. And I know it's a fine print, lots of text, so I have had to bring my glasses to read this out to you. But just to make it look also very bureaucratic, I have put all the rules on one page. So let me read this out. He writes, the whole administrative staff under the supreme authority then consists in the purest type of individual officials who are appointed. The appointed here is important. It is not that they are brought in, at the discretion of the traditional authority. They are personally free and subject to authority only with respect to their impersonal official obligations. So I can, there's a 9 to 5 job, and after 5 p.m. I am not subject to that authority. You can assign me a task that I will do within the office hours. They are organized in a clearly defined hierarchy of offices. There is the junior engineer, then the senior engineer, then the executive engineer. Then it's a very clear definition of what these offices are. Each office has a clearly defined sphere of competence in the legal sense. And the office is filled by free contractual relationship. There is free selection, which he talks about. How are they selected? Candidates are selected based on their technical qualifications. In the most rational case, this is tested by examination or guaranteed by diplomas certifying technical training, or both. They are appointed, not elected. I mean, this is, we can think about in the Indian context, we can think about the Indian administrative services as the perfect example of a bureaucratic organization which follows pretty much all of these rules. You have to be technically qualified. There is an examination on the basis of which you reach that position. In the position, there is a clear hierarchy where you are. You are bound only within the confines of your official duty, and otherwise you are free, right? So these are some of the characteristics of officers who are appointed, not elected, in a bureaucratic system. Let's read further. They are remunerated by fixed salaries in money, for the most part with a right to pensions. Only under certain circumstances does the employing authority, especially in private organizations, have a right to terminate the appointment, but the official is always free to resign. The salary scale is graded according to rank in the hierarchy, but in addition to this criteria, the responsibility of the position and the requirement of the incumbent's social status may be taken into account. So, it's pretty clear, especially in India, not everywhere in fact, administrative roles have very particular salaries. In fact, there's so much specification that your pay scale is specified, and the square foot of housing you can be allotted is also specified. So there is a lot of legitimation to what size of house you can occupy, how much salary you will draw, what % of it will be allotted to you for travel allowance, if you go for out of station work, how much is your per diem, a lot of technical rational notions in terms of what level you occupy in that hierarchy, and so what your entitlements are, right? That's a solid bureaucratic system. Then he writes, the office is treated as the sole or at least the primary occupation of the incumbent. It constitutes a career. There is a system of promotion according to seniority or to achievement or both. Promotion is dependent on the judgment of superiors. The official works entirely separated from ownership of the means of administration and without appropriation of his position. So, somebody joins the IAS or somebody joins the university system at a particular rank, then you always know that after let's say 5 to 7 years from an assistant professor, I can apply to be promoted to an associate professor. After 5-7 years of that, I can apply to be promoted to a professor. So there is a very clearly laid out career progression, right? So you know how your career, the possibility that your career can go, will go in a particular direction. So these things are all clearly spelled out. And the last point he makes is, he is subject to strict and systematic discipline and control in the conduct of his office. So there are clearly laid out rules and one has to follow those rules. Okay. Now here I put up these images of dusty files piled up. That's the kind of image we have of a bureaucratic system, right? I mean, we think of, in casual parlance, oftentimes we say things like, too much bureaucratic, this work will never get done because of bureaucracy. The bureaucracy came in the way, otherwise my job would have been done. Bureaucracy is a bottleneck. It is not letting free entrepreneurial ideas to progress. There are all these notions connected to bureaucracy. But look what Weber had to say about bureaucracy. Weber writes, the purely bureaucratic type of administration is, from the technical point of view, capable of attaining the highest degree of efficiency. It makes possible particularly high degree of calculability. Well, in the sense of the purest type, he is perhaps right. This is the most predictable system. If you do X, you will get Y. If you get this job, you will get this salary. What the career progression will be. How your files are supposed to move. So when in the purest type, it is perhaps possible for it to be the most efficient, but Weber also reminds us that purest type is only an idea. It's only an idea where we accentuate certain characteristics. He uses also the word ideal type, and I spoke about it in the first lecture on Weber, in order for us to get an analytical category to study. So this is a methodological tool. It is like, it is not the reality, and this is an important point to remember. I'm going to end with Weber's definition of state, here again, state is one of those institutions through which legal rational authority is executed and performed. And so let's look at what he has to say about the state. He writes that the state is a human community that successfully claims the monopoly of the legitimate use of physical force within a given territory. It's a very interesting definition. I mean, I don't think before that anybody had given a definition of the state that spoke about state in relation to violence. Here Weber is talking about its violence, the monopoly over violence within a given territory, and related to the idea that the state's primary function is the defense of its subjects and citizens and its territory, right? So note that territory is one of the characteristics of the state. The right to use physical force is ascribed to other institutions or to individuals only to the extent in which the state permits it. the state is considered the sole source of the right to use violence. Subsequently, as we go on further, we will look at other theorists who have defined power, who have tried to understand the role of violence within the state or outside the state, and also different ways in which, for example, when we speak of Michel Foucault, his understanding of power is very, very different from how Weber conceptualized it. Nevertheless, this is also a very important way of understanding power, and as Weber himself said, his is an interpretive sociology, and interpretive sociology can be a subjective sociology. So we end our class here. I'll see you in the next lecture. Thank you.